Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We begin with Joe Biden and his seemingly endless gaffes calling Zelensky Putin and Kamala Harris Donald Trump. It's embarrassing his party, his country and his allies. But will the president drop out of the electoral race? We'll discuss that. Meanwhile, his team is busy lecturing India over its ties with Moscow. Leading the charge is the US Ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti. We'll tell you how America refuses to learn from history. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has issued a new threat to NATO as they plan to deploy missiles in Germany. Russia says it will respond militarily. Did Zelensky's wife buy a $4 million Bugatti with aid money? How Pakistani forces crack down on protesters in Balochistan. What is exercise Pitch Black that the Indian Air Force is participating in? How the jobs crisis in India has taken an ugly turn. Why the Kenyan president has fired almost his entire cabinet. Why 70 whales died in Scotland, and who is responsible for work-life balance, you or your company? We'll discuss all of this and more. The headlines first. Nepal's Prime Minister loses the vote of confidence in Parliament. It comes days after the largest party in the ruling coalition withdrew support. Pushp Kamal Dahal had taken charge just 18 months ago. KP Sharma Oli is expected to form the next government. Setback for Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Pakistan Supreme Court awards more than 20 extra reserved seats in the parliament to Imran Khan's party. This will ramp up pressure on the weak coalition government of Shehbaz Sharif. The court ruling is a big win for Imran Khan, who remains in jail. In India, Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal gets interim bail, but he will remain in jail because he is facing other charges as well. Kejriwal was granted bail only in the money laundering case. In the month of March, the Delhi Chief Minister was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate. In June, he was arrested by the Central Bureau of Investigation from Tihar jail. Niger imposes a curfew after several inmates escaped from a high-security prison. The incident took place in the capital, Niamey. The region is prone to attacks by groups linked to the Islamic State and the Al-Qaeda. Niger is ruled by a military junta that seized power in a coup in July 2023. And Elon Musk-owned X, formerly Twitter, is misleading users with its blue ticks. That's the charge leveled by the European Union. It issues a warning to X, the first under the EU's Digital Services Act. This could lead to hefty fines for the social media platform.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be Vice President, but I think she was not qualified to be President. I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
That's Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America, making daily headlines for his gaffes. The latest set came yesterday at an important press conference. Biden's team had billed it a big boy presser, where all concerns about the president's health should have been laid to rest. It was planned in the perfect setting. During the NATO summit, when all key allies of the US would be present and journalists from around the world would cover it. It was indeed a good opportunity, but Biden blew it again. He spoke for an hour, covered a lot of ground from foreign policy to economy to politics to the election, but none of those things made news. What stood out were the president's blunders and the reactions of world leaders around him.
I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be Vice President, but I think she was not qualified to be President.
Their faces said it all. It's as if they were trapped in a nightmare, hoping for it to end. Biden's performance triggered a flood of bad press. Newspapers around the world have been talking about his gaffes. Look at some of the headlines. Toe-curling moment. Biden introduces Zelensky as Putin. Biden vows to complete the job despite stumbles. These are from British newspapers, and here's one from Italy. A flurry of gaffes, it says. Here's another one. Embarrassing moment at NATO summit. This is a Dutch newspaper. In Spain, Germany and Japan too, Biden's blunders were splashed across papers. Unfortunately for the president, it doesn't end here.
Is it well that on this occasion too, the president stumbled into some clamorous slip-ups?
When he spoke about his deputy Kamala Harris, he referred to her as a Vice President Trump. Passing the word to Zelensky, he made a mistake and instead said that he was passing the word to Putin. Well, in general, this just shows what state he is in at the moment.
This is a full-blown PR nightmare. Biden may insist that he's the best man for the job, but no one seems to believe him anymore. Least of all his party colleagues, the Democrats. They want him out. And if the president refuses to go himself, a mutiny is now a real possibility. Because more and more Democrats are coming out in public. They're asking Joe Biden to step aside. In the last 24 hours, 2 more Democrats have made this demand. And how many of them have said this publicly? At least 17 of them. 17 Democrats have openly called for Joe Biden to end his presidential campaign. These are members of the U.S. Congress in the lower house, better known as the House of Representatives. And reports say more Democrats could join this club in the days ahead. But so far, Biden remains defiant.
In your opening answer, you referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
Yesterday, reporters tried to grill the president. They asked him direct and pointed questions on his health, on his daily routine, and whether he can carry on for 4 more years. And this is how Biden responded.
Instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. And every single day I'm surrounded by good docs. If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again,
Joe Biden tried to mount a strong defense, but it doesn't make his situation better. And forget about the presidential bid for a moment. Look at his current official status. He is the sitting president of the United States of America, having to explain if he's getting enough sleep, having to share when he goes to bed, when he wakes up, what kind of neurological exams he takes or should take, what his medical reports say. He's being grilled about all of this. Would you vote for such a candidate? And while his age has been a point of concern for a while, his health became the biggest election issue after the debate. It was a disaster for the president. It completely derailed his campaign and crashed his popularity. He's trying very hard to recover, but honestly, it's now painful to watch. Not just for the Democrats, but for America's allies too. Take a look at this video from the NATO summit. That was Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni with the outgoing NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and the Finnish President Alexander Stubb. Reports say they were waiting for Joe Biden. The president was running late. Meloni seems a bit annoyed, rolling her eyes and pretending to look at her watch. Some others were more forgiving.
Of course, we can all have a slip of the tongue. I don't hide my preference. Certainly, as a president and a progressive, I prefer Biden as president of the United States. Slips of tongue happen, and if you always monitor everyone, you will find enough of them.
But this vote of assurance is not helping Joe Biden. The attacks continue both from his political and geopolitical rivals. Donald Trump, of course, was quick to attack. "Great job, Joe," he said on his social media platform Truth Social. And the Russians aren't holding back either.
I mean his statements regarding President Putin. This is unacceptable for us, and we don't think it in any way makes an American head of state look good.
Biden is now a source of international embarrassment, both for his party and his country. His re-election campaign is clearly imploding. But he's too stubborn to step aside. Either way, a Democratic victory now looks tough, with or without Joe Biden as the candidate. So you have Biden pulling off a series of gaffes in the US. But this tendency seems to have crossed continents and made its way to Americans in other places, like India. Yesterday, we saw a foot-in-mouth moment here. Courtesy Eric Garcetti, the US ambassador to India. Garcetti thought it was a good idea to lecture India over Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent trip to Russia. Take a look at what he said.
I know that India, and I respect that India, likes its strategic autonomy. But in times of conflict, there is no such thing as strategic autonomy.
That was a shot fired at India and its relationship with Russia. The first rebuke was soft, but Garcetti followed it up by talking about India's relationship with the US.
Because this relationship in Washington is a special one indeed. It is very wide. In Washington today, where very few things unite American political leaders, it is bipartisan, it is bicameral, and it is bi-branch. But as I also remind my Indian friends, while it is wide and it is deeper than it's ever been, it is not yet deep enough. That if we take it for granted from the Indian side towards America.
He said that the India-US relationship is, quote unquote, not yet deep enough. And he warned India to not take it for granted. Basically, he told New Delhi to not push its luck, because the US may change its mind about the friendship. And this is the latest in a string of American lectures. First, there was Matthew Miller, the US State Department spokesperson. Listen to what he said.
As I said yesterday, we have been quite clear about our concerns about India's relationship with Russia. We have expressed those privately, directly to the Indian government, and continue to do so, and that hasn't changed.
Miller said that the US raised its concerns with India privately. Unwarranted, but at least it was private. Then there was the public rebuke by Ambassador Garcetti in New Delhi. His tone may have been friendly, but his message was not. And finally, there was Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor. Yesterday, he said, and I quote, "We've made clear to every country in the world, including India, that a bet on Russia as a long-term reliable partner is not a good bet." Sullivan's statement is extremely ironic. He talks about Russia not being a reliable partner. And he said this yesterday, within hours of Garcetti telling New Delhi to not take Washington's friendship for granted. You can't make this up. The Americans really need to get their story straight. And more than that, they need to get with the times. They never liked India having strategic autonomy. It was the case in the last century as well, where the US was fighting its Cold War against the Soviet Union. India wanted to maintain good ties with both sides, and this angered the Americans. So they chose to lash out by supporting India's arch enemy, Pakistan. We all know how that's worked out. Pakistan is a terrorism hotbed, and India is the world's largest democracy. This happened despite the US being on the opposite camp. A camp it chose because it disliked India's strategic autonomy. And now it is making the same mistake again by consistently lecturing India about its ties with Moscow and warning India about not taking American support for granted. It's like a song stuck on loop. Washington needs to come out of this old world mentality. It could not shake India's resolve in the last century when India was significantly less developed. So what makes the Americans think that they can influence India now? India is fiercely protecting its strategic autonomy. Garcetti said there is no such thing as strategic autonomy in times of conflict. But whose conflict? This is not India's conflict. It's time Washington accepted this. Are we on the brink of another NATO Russia war? Or at least Cold War? It's a question we have asked many times. There have been accusations, posturing, saber rattling, and even some border drills. But the NATO and Russia have never come down to a face-off. Will they now? And here's why I ask. The NATO summit has just ended. The military alliance has turned 75. Washington played host. NATO leaders arrived, clicked pictures and got down to business. They had a lot on the agenda: Ukraine's membership, the China threat, and their favorite enemy, Russia. And they did not miss the opportunity to poke Russia again. The US made a major announcement. Washington will deploy missiles to Germany.
The United States decided to deploy the precision strike capabilities in Germany, which I think is a very good decision, and it fits into all the decisions we already took. It is something of deterrence, so it's securing peace, and it is a necessary and important decision at the right time.
So what are these deployments about? The US will be sending long-range missiles to Germany. These are period deployments, meaning they're not permanent. The Americans will send surface-to-air SM-6 missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and hypersonic weapons. These deployments will begin in the year 2026. Now, Germany does not have long-range missiles that launch from the ground, so this move will boost Berlin's capabilities. And the White House argues that the deployment is crucial. It will act as a deterrent. Germany says it is crucial for peace. So that's the line that the West is taking. But what does Russia have to say about it? Well, a lot.
This is aimed against us. Of course, we must be aware of this. But there is no reason for nervousness or any alarm, because we began to prepare for such a development a long time ago. The aggressive course of the United States and the North Atlantic Alliance, led by Washington, is not changing. But we cannot be intimidated. We'll find a response.
So Moscow is not happy about this at all. The Kremlin calls it a national security threat. They say they're mulling a response. They want to deter NATO. But here's something else that stood out in their statement. The Kremlin says, and I quote, "All the attributes of the Cold War with the direct confrontation are returning." It's a strong statement. To understand it, let's go back to history. In the 1970s, the Cold War was at its peak. The Soviet Union deployed ballistic missiles. They were in striking distance of Europe. So the US deployed missiles in West Germany. The Pershing II ballistic missiles. That's what the Americans deployed. And this led to protests across the nation because the Germans believed it would make them a target. After years of negotiations, America and the Soviet Union came to a deal that was signed in 1987. The agreement promised to remove the weapons from Europe. The two sides had a deadline for a few years, so they withdrew missiles from the region. And all was well until 2019. But that's when America blamed Moscow for violating the deal, and they pulled out of the treaty under Donald Trump. And this is what Russia is referring to now, the Cold War posturing. Are we back to that? Turkey's President Erdogan has warned against this. He's urged NATO to avoid conflict with Russia. But the appeal may have come too late because Moscow plans to respond to American deployment now militarily. They've said it in so many words. They've not given specific details, but the prospect itself should worry the world. In the month of June, President Putin met his security officials. He said Russia should restart production of short-range nuclear-capable missiles. So you get the drift. What we're looking at is a renewed arms race in Europe. But will it just be mere posturing this time, or will it turn into a full-blown conflict? It's a story we'll keep tracking. So Ukraine is fighting Russia, not just on the battlefield, but also on social media. A recent report claimed that the Ukrainian president's wife was siphoning money. And what did she do with that money? The report said she bought a $4 million car, a Bugatti. Later, it turned out to be fake news. But you know the kind of damage such reports can do. Also, this is not the first such report. Disinformation has been rampant throughout the war, and most of it is around believable themes, like this Bugatti. It's about Ukrainian corruption. coupled with the anger over Western aid. So how is the country dealing with this? And what is the West doing about it? Our next report tells you.
The Ukraine war, it's being fought on the battlefield, but also on social media. Disinformation has been rampant throughout this conflict, and a new one targets the Ukrainian president's wife, Olena Zelenska. She allegedly bought a rare Bugatti Tourbillon from Paris last month. Apparently, it was for $4.8 million. An invoice with her name showed the price of the car, when it will be delivered, along with the production date. But here's the most important part of it. It's being alleged that she bought it with US aid money. So how much of this is true? The report first appeared on an obscure French website. Soon, Russian agencies picked it up, and it slowly snowballed. Netizens shared the report, slamming the Ukrainian president and his wife. Social media asked whether it was the money of US taxpayers or British taxpayers. But the invoice turned out to be false. If you look carefully, you can spot the anomalies. It had several issues like inaccurate descriptions, a missing order number, and even the lack of a seller's address. Bugatti issued a sharp denial, calling it fake news. The Paris dealership threatened legal action. So how did this disinformation spread? Russian outlets and media have long accused the Zelenskys of siphoning money. They claim the Ukrainian president lives a luxurious life, all on Western aid. Well, this isn't the first such fake report, but you can see why it was so believable. Ukraine is known for its corruption. Even during the war, multiple corruption scandals have engulfed the Ukraine Defense Ministry. For example, Kyiv placed an order for 100,000 mortar shells worth about $40 million. They were paid for but never delivered. So where did that money go? Well, to Ukrainian defense officials. So this Bugatti story, which hinted at more Ukrainian corruption, coupled with the anger over the US aid money, gave birth to the perfect disinformation storm. It threatened to destabilize support for Ukraine. Usually, such stories become even more prominent during election season. Like a story about Ukrainian officials buying yachts with US military aid. It became so big that several members of the US Congress brought it up. That too turned out to be false. Like a story about Ukrainian officials buying yachts with US military aid. It became so big that several members of the US Congress brought it up. That too turned out to be false. Another report claimed that a Ukrainian information operation was allegedly targeting the Trump campaign. The US Justice Department too has dealt with this issue. It blames the Russians for this disinformation campaign as well. The operators reportedly used fake social media accounts which were amplified by artificial intelligence. Washington claims such accounts spread pro-Kremlin messages in the United States and abroad. Nearly 1,000 social media accounts were allegedly associated with this. So, while the Bugatti story has been fact-checked, there are countless such stories doing the rounds, all targeted at the Western audience this election season. The West believes while Russia is making gains on the battlefield, it's waging a war of optics as well.
The images you just saw are from Balochistan, Pakistan's largest province. That was the region's capital, Quetta. That is where the Pakistani police went on a rampage. They attacked a group of demonstrators who were protesting peacefully against a rampant problem in Balochistan. Enforced disappearances. A lot of people have gone missing over the past few years. The protesters were asking for their return. Among those missing are students and a man called Zahir Ahmad Baloch. His disappearance was the trigger for the latest demonstrations. Zahir Ahmad Baloch was allegedly abducted on the 27th of June. His family wants to know his whereabouts. So they've been demonstrating for days. Yesterday was the 11th day of demonstrations in Quetta. There was no response from the government, so some protesters decided to move to a different part of town, known as the Red Zone. And it seems that the Pakistani police forces did not like the idea. They would have preferred that the protesters remain put, hidden and out of sight. So the police decided to push them back by resorting to violence. More than a dozen people were injured. 27 protesters were arrested, including 5 women, but they remain defiant. Because this doesn't compare to what usually happens. Like I said, this protest was against enforced disappearances. Since the year 2004, there have been about 7,000 cases. 7,000 cases in 20 years, 7,000 missing persons cases have been registered in Balochistan, and these are the registered ones. Thousands of people have lost their family members who just vanished without a trace. The images you saw earlier were shared by people like this, by young women whose fathers disappeared. They say that a silent genocide is underway and that Pakistan is trying to eradicate the Baloch people. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Baloch people are spread across 3 countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran. That is the historical region of Balochistan. There are about 15 to 20 million Baloch people in this area. They have their own language, culture and customs. Islamabad controls the largest chunk of Balochistan. It forms Pakistan's Balochistan province, the largest province in the country, by the way, making up 44% of Pakistan's landmass. Balochistan is also the most sparsely populated province in Pakistan, and there are multiple reasons for this. The most basic is that the environment here is harsh. The area is mostly desert. It is extremely dry, so it cannot support a massive population. But what Balochistan lacks in farmland, it more than makes up for in mineral wealth. Gold, silver, diamonds, copper, all of this and more can be found in Balochistan. It's a resource-rich region. Despite this, the region remains poor, partly due to Islamabad's general incompetence and partly due to bias. You see, resources and wealth are traditionally diverted to the center, to regions like Punjab and Sindh. That's where all the money goes. Peripheral areas like Balochistan or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa suffer from neglect. And this sets off a domino effect. Residents of the neglected areas feel like second-class citizens in Pakistan. They rise up against the Pakistani state, often in the form of militant organizations. So Pakistan ends up creating its own problems and then tries to clamp down on them with violence. It's a vicious cycle, and it has resulted in this crisis in Balochistan, made worse by the situation in Gwadar. Gwadar is a coastal town in Balochistan where China has invested in a deep-sea port. This is a part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The port was supposed to boost trade, but not for Gwadar or Balochistan, for China and its friends sitting in Islamabad. That's where all the benefits are going. So the locals do not benefit, and this has made some of them resentful. It has led to a spate of attacks on infrastructure built by the Chinese. And the result is this. Pakistan is now diverting more resources to ramp up security for the Chinese projects. And once again, the ordinary people of Balochistan get left behind. Our next story is about exercise Pitch Black. It's a warfare exercise hosted by Australia. It's a biennial event, which means it happens once in 2 years. This year's edition will be the largest ever. 20 nations are taking part, and India is one of them. A contingent of the Indian Air Force is already in the country. India's Sukhoi fighter jets will be seen in action alongside F-35 and Typhoon fighter aircraft. Our next report has the details.
Hosted by the Royal Australian Air Force, Exercise Pitch Black has a rich history spanning 43 years. But this is its largest edition ever. 20 countries, over 140 aircraft, more than 4,000 military personnel will take part in it. Also joining them will be the Indian Air Force. The biennial exercise began on July 12th and it will go on till the 2nd of August. Exercise Pitch Black derives its name from its emphasis on nighttime flying. It's usually over vast unpopulated areas. This creates unique and challenging combat scenarios. This edition focuses on large force employment warfare. What countries hope to achieve is better cooperation and enhanced operational experience. The Indian Air Force is sending a 150-strong contingent that includes pilots, engineers, technicians, controllers and others. The Air Force will be operating the Su-30 MKI multi-role fighters, the C-17 Globemaster and the IL-78 air-to-air refueling aircraft, playing crucial combat-enabling roles. According to the Indian Air Force, Exercise Pitch Black offers an excellent opportunity. It will allow participating nations to strengthen their ability to deploy over large distances. It also helps build strong aviation associations and facilitates interoperability among diverse air forces. This isn't the first time that the IAF is taking part in this. It has done so earlier as well in 2018 and 2022. Exercise Pitch Black 2024 will feature a diverse array of advanced fighter aircraft. The likes of F-35, F-22, F-18, F-15, Gripen and Typhoon. This gives the Indian Air Force an opportunity to operate alongside some of the world's most advanced fighter jets. Exercise Pitch Black started as a unilateral training event. In 1983, the US and Australia were part of it. Over the years, it has expanded to include other nations, the likes of India, France, Germany, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, Thailand and the United Kingdom. This year is a first for many nations like Italy. Italy is sending the ITS Cavour, marking the first time an aircraft carrier is involved in Exercise Pitch Black. Other first-time countries include Papua New Guinea, Spain and the Philippines.
Now let's talk about jobs. Have you tried to appear for a job interview recently? Imagine going for that interview. What would your day be like? You'd probably arrive early, try to settle in before the interview. If possible, try to engage with some of the current employees to learn more about your prospective employer, get to know the workplace better. But in India's western state of Gujarat, some job hunters were in for a nightmare, a stampede at the interview venue. Take a look. This video is going viral on social media. A private firm was holding walk-in interviews at a hotel. Apparently, they had 10 positions to fill. 10 positions. 1,800 candidates showed up. I'll repeat that for you. 1,800 candidates for just 10 positions. The side railing at the hotel's entrance collapsed. They could not handle the crowd. And who can blame them? This was not anticipated. There were reports of a minor scuffle too. Thankfully, no one was hurt. But this could have easily escalated into a tragedy. What's worse, this is not a one-off. It's a story that keeps repeating itself. Thousands of applicants applying for a handful of jobs. The trend so far is far too common in India. I'll give you another example. Recently, some vacancies were announced in Uttar Pradesh, a state in northern India. These were vacancies in the UP police. They had 62 open positions. Do you know how many candidates applied? More than 93,000. Over 93,000 for 62 seats. The eligibility criterion was schooling till class 5, meaning any candidate who had passed the 5th grade was eligible to apply. But thousands of applicants were overqualified. 3,700 of them, 3,700 of them had a PhD. 5,000 of them were graduates and 28,000 were postgraduates. And what was the job they were applying for? The post of a peon. The UP police was hiring 62 peons, and for these positions, graduates, postgraduates, even PhDs were applying. This is often the case with government jobs, way more applicants than positions. But as we saw in Gujarat, even the private sector is being flooded by applications. What does it tell you? That there's a jobs crisis, especially for the youth. They're desperate to find work and they're applying for whichever position they can find, even if it means working as a peon after getting a PhD. As per the Government of India's data, nearly 16% of the urban youth are jobless. These are youngsters in the 15 to 29-year age group. 16% of them don't have a job. Estimates by private agencies are much higher. They say up to 40% of India's youth is unemployed. Irrespective of which data set you look at, the overall trend is the same. And the overall problem is the same. India needs to create more jobs, more quality jobs, and that too consistently. The union budget could be an opportunity to set the tone. It will be delivered later this month by India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Leading experts will be closely watching the speech. Global banks have released their budget expectations. Banks like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs both believe the government can do more on the jobs front. Morgan Stanley says the government can support job creation by pushing more capital expenditure, which means spending more on areas like infrastructure. Goldman Sachs would like to see a greater focus on manufacturing. This could create more labor-intensive jobs. India should tap all available avenues. With about 24 million young people entering the workforce every year, India's challenge is only growing bigger. It will have to do everything it can to get the youth to work. Now let's turn our attention to Africa, to Kenya in the east, where President William Ruto has just taken another step. He addressed the country and made this announcement.
Recent events that necessitated the withdrawal of the finance bill, which will require a review and reorganization of our budget and fiscal management, have brought us to an inflection point. I have today, in line with the powers given to me by Article 1521 and 1525B of the Constitution and Sections 12 of the Office of the Attorney General's Act, decided to dismiss with immediate effect all the Cabinet Secretaries and Attorney General of the Republic of Kenya, of the Cabinet of Kenya, except the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs. And of course, the Office of the Deputy President is not affected in any way.
Ruto has dismissed almost his entire cabinet. This is his latest move to try and quell public anger, which has exploded over the last few weeks, leaving his grip on power tenuous. People began protesting a few weeks ago in the run-up to the annual budget. Kenya's Finance Bill 2024, President William Ruto tried to raise taxes. He wanted to hike taxes on basic goods like bread. And Ruto's reason was simple. Kenya had a high amount of public debt. The government needed more money to pay this off, to service the debt. And Ruto wanted to get this money from ordinary people. Now, on the one hand, every country must pay what it owes, and the people need to contribute to state coffers. That was Ruto's thinking too. But the people weren't having it, because he was partly responsible for the debt crisis. That's how they see it. Ruto was Kenya's deputy president during the previous administration, the administration that took all the loans. So Kenya sunk deeper and deeper into debt on Ruto's watch. He was still elected as president, though, after promising to improve the situation. And since he took charge, he has tried. But his solution has always been to raise taxes. It's been 2 years now, and now the Kenyan people were fed up. That is why the latest tax proposals led to public outrage. And they have snowballed into a new movement, a movement to oust Ruto's government. At every protest, you will hear the chant saying Ruto must go. The Kenyan president knows this. He understands that the public sentiment is turning against him, which is why he keeps taking new steps to quell public anger. First, he decided to scrap his own budget, the finance bill. He scrapped it. Then he tried engaging with the protesters. He hosted an event on social media platform X. He spoke to young Kenyans, the demographic that is leading the protest. He addressed them directly, but that did not work either. Last week, Ruto announced austerity measures. He said that instead of raising taxes, he would cut government spending across the board, and his own office as well. He ordered a freeze in pay rises for his cabinet. That didn't work either, because he's now decided to get rid of the cabinet altogether. But you can see the pattern. Every few days, President Ruto is trying something new, hoping that something works and the people of Kenya settle down. But it seems the people have another idea. They're gathering signatures to exercise a recall power. A rule was put forward in 2010. If 30% of a constituency's voters make an appeal, the sitting MP can be recalled. This power has not been used in Kenya in the past. It has never been used before, but the protesters want to try it this time. One constituency already has about half the required signatures.
I'm hoping that Kabete will be able to inspire the rest of the country to take action. Because sincerely, if we don't put these people on check, then that is it. It's the end of Kenya.
Will the Kenyan public manage to put its MPs in check? Will they manage to oust President Ruto? We'll be tracking this closely. Our next story comes from Scotland, which has witnessed its worst whale beaching in decades. A pod of 77 whales beached itself on the island of Sanday. What is beaching? It means that they stranded themselves on beaches. So 77 whales beached themselves. They were found hours later by rescuers. By then, 65 whales had already died. Only 12 were alive. Officials tried refloating them, but they failed. So the whales had to be euthanized. In the end, all 77 whales died within the span of a day. But why did it happen? And why do whales beach themselves? Here's a report.
A Scottish beach has witnessed an unprecedented sight. An entire pod of whales washed ashore. Rescue teams scrambled to save them, but unfortunately, they couldn't. Yesterday, 77 whales beached themselves in what could be the biggest mass stranding in Scotland for decades. They were found at the Tresness beach on the island of Sanday. The pod included males, females and calves. Some of the whales were up to 22 feet long. By the time the rescuers found the whales, which was only hours later, 65 had already died. Only 12 whales were alive. Officials tried refloating the whales, but their efforts failed because the sand was soft. So today, a decision was taken to euthanize them. While this may sound cruel, it was the logical choice. The survival rate for beached whales is low. They can only survive for about 6 hours on land. After that, their health begins to deteriorate. And eventually, after suffering, they die. The question is, why did so many whales beach themselves? Well, there are no clear answers. Experts say it's too early to know what caused the stranding. But most likely, one of the whales got into trouble and the rest of the pod tried to help. For now, officials have launched an investigation into the matter, and public have been asked to stay away from the area because post-mortem examinations are being carried out. Though this is the largest stranding event in Scotland, strandings of a similar scale have been seen in recent years, and that's no surprise. Like most things in nature, climate change has worsened beach strandings as well. It is an indirect factor as it warms up the oceans and puts the whales at risk of habitat loss and pushes the species into newer and unfamiliar territories. No one knows why the phenomenon occurs. But the greatest strength of whales can also be their downfall. Whales are highly sociable animals, so if one member falls sick, is injured or under threat, the member goes towards the shore to beach itself, and the other whales follow, which scientists assume is the case in the Scotland beaching as well. But so far, this is only a theory. Science doesn't have any concrete evidence yet, except that whales aren't the only animals that beach themselves. So do dolphins. There are around 2,000 strandings each year worldwide, and most of them result in the animals dying. And till we find out why this happens, we won't be able to prevent it.
If you're frenzied, it is you, not the job or school. That's some real talk, but those are not our words. This is a message from billionaire Jamie Dimon, the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States. We are telling you this because Dimon is now going viral. An old video of his has resurfaced and it has triggered a debate. Listen to this.
It is your job to take care of your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul, your friends, your family, your health. Your job. It's not our job.
Dimon is talking about work-life balance. He says that maintaining this balance is a personal responsibility. It is your job, not your company's. And his comments have garnered some support. Some users on X are calling it great advice for both life and work. But others are also criticizing him. One of them says it's easier said than done, and then goes on to list their packed schedule. Another says there is room to increase efficiency, but there is also a workload threshold. With too much work, frenzy is bound to set in. And it is the company's role and responsibility to prevent this. So who is responsible for protecting work-life balance? Employers and companies, or the employees themselves? That's the debate, and that's what we'll try to address tonight. But first, let's answer this. What is work-life balance? It is the ability to compartmentalize job, tasks, and life. But there's no clear-cut definition. No clear barriers between the two. It is subjective. The definition has changed dramatically since the rise of remote work. It has gone beyond paid time off and free gym membership at work. Now, flexible schedules are considered a part of work-life balance. So is a healthy environment at work, or open dialogue between employees and employers. Essentially, whatever helps workers create the life and work they want. And that's a huge playing ground. Are companies obliged to help cultivate it? According to one survey, 43% of workers say no, it is not the company's responsibility. They believe that the responsibility falls squarely on individuals, 43%. But if Jamie Dimon looked at this survey, he would most likely disagree. Hear him yourself, and not just the bit that is going viral, but the whole explanation.
It is your job to take care of your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul, your friends, your family, your health. Your job. It's not our job. So I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding that some of the companies, now we should do everything we can to help you. I tell people we give you medical, shrinks, Pilates, massages. I mean, we really do try to take care of our people. But I can't make up for you not doing those other things, and you really have to do it yourself.
We are no billionaire apologists, but what he said makes sense. We talk about work-life balance. How about we balance responsibility? Responsibility sharing as well. This is a new era of work where people see work-life balance as a personalized package, as the capacity to bend work around their individual needs. So this time, workers are defining what that balance constitutes. Workers rather than companies. But companies too have a role. They have to help maintain a healthy workplace. They have to make sure that employees are treated fairly. That is the bare minimum. But at the end of the day, it is the company that we work for. It is not our parent or life coach. So we have to do our bit as well. We have to set boundaries, prioritize our own well-being, and take advantage of the benefits that we do get. For instance, 46% of American workers don't use all their paid time off. Plus, we have to accept that work-life balance is not the same for everyone. It is not about equal time spent in each place, work and life. It is about making the relationship between the two a healthy one. And no one knows that better than you. Tell us what you think. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Spain, 3 runners have been injured, one of them gored, on the 6th day of the Bull Running Festival. In the US, a massive blaze breaks out in a Philadelphia apartment building. In Ukraine, orchestra presents a token remembrance on the site of a children's hospital that was hit by a Russian missile. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1823, India launched its first steam engine ship. It was named Diana. At the time, India was colonized by the British, so Diana was operated by the East India Company and became their first steam-powered warship. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching.